Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr Pyne, for joining us today. I understand you were going to last week and you would have been present personally, so thank you.
I would have been happy to be there, but I couldn't be, unfortunately, this week.
My questions, unlike most of the other questions, go to section or paragraph 226, not 225. 226 states that ministers shall ensure that their post-ministerial personal conduct is consistent with the dignity, reputation and integrity of the Parliament. What is I'd like to explore that reputational aspect. What is your remuneration for your engagement with EY?
Well, Senator, my remuneration is a matter covered by commercial in confidence provisions and also non-disclosure agreements, and so and it's also immaterial to the Ministerial Code of Conduct. Whether EY is paying me $1 or $100 doesn't change the two limbs of the Ministerial Code of Conduct and how to comply with them.
Well, I accept that as your answer. I happen to disagree, but we don't need to further explore it, because if it was an outrageous sum, it would raise other questions, but we can't find out what the sum is. How many days...
I can assure you it's not an outrageous sum.
How many days per month are you engaging with, are you contracted to engage with EY?
Presently, my plan is to can work with EY 2 days a month. 2
days, thank you. And what are their expectations of the things you would cover, topics you would address?
Well, I think we've probably covered that a bit in the statement I made in response to questions from Senator Patrick, which is that, and I guess the shortest answer is to interpret the policies that have been announced by the government over the last 3 years or the last 6 years outside defence as well as within defence, all of which is publicly available information. But sometimes bringing that together in a more coherent way is the strategy, is the skill that an ex-cabinet minister or ex-politician can bring.
Thank you. Coming back specifically to paragraph 226, how do your actions in taking up employment with EY provide transparency and public trust?
Well, I think, Senator, how former ministers conduct themselves in their retirement is important to build trust in the Australian public and our political system. And I've tried in my last quarter of a century of being in politics to do my best, and not always succeeded, of course, in trying to ensure that I uphold the standards of integrity that are expected by the public. I intend to continue to do so in my retirement, and I regard the Parliament as a very important part of our democratic system. Otherwise, I wouldn't have sought to stay in it for 26 years, and I will conduct myself in my retirement in the same way as I did in my political career, which is hard at the ball, but always playing the ball rather than the other player.
So thank you. I would disagree with you again there about the public's perception, but you gave me an honest answer. Thank you. Now, in questioning Ms Bishop, she responded that she never had a conversation with Prime Minister Turnbull about the standards. So I wonder how she gave an undertaking to the Prime Minister to comply with those standards. So I ask you, how did you give an undertaking to comply with the standards when you were appointed Minister?
Chair, just to be fair, I think to Ms Bishop, who's not here to defend herself, I think Senator Roberts has perhaps inadvertently verbaled her. I think she stated when asked that question that she provided that assurance through the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet.
Correct. She did so in the investigation, which Dr Parkinson admitted he didn't have any investigative powers. I was specifically referring to Ms Bishop dealing with the Prime Minister and giving an undertaking at the time of her appointment. So, Mr Pyne, could you tell me if you gave any undertaking to the Prime Minister at the time, whoever that was, for your latest role?
Yes.
How did you give that undertaking?
Well, my recollection is that when you become a minister, or indeed a parliamentary secretary, you get sent a document to complete about your financial arrangements, which also contains a copy of the Ministerial Code of Conduct, and you obviously study that, which if you didn't, you wouldn't be very sensible, and you fill out the form and then you sign it and send it back. And I think in the action of doing that, that is, in my view, a contract that you have created with the Prime Minister at the time, whether it was Howard, Abbott, Turnbull or Morrison, as I served all four of them, that you will abide by the Ministerial Code of Conduct, and you have divulged your financial arrangements to the Prime Minister, and if that changes in terms of your financial arrangements, you're required to continue to update it. Now, I took that at the time as establishing a contract with the Prime Minister to abide by the Ministerial Code of Conduct.
So it was implicit, not stated explicitly?
Well, look, I can't recollect the actual document, Senator, but I think I'm pretty confident that it contained a front page that required a signature and a date, and the following pages of that document, which is obviously a private one between you and the Prime Minister, it contains the financial reporting requirements as well as the Ministerial Code of Conduct.
Thank you.
Mr.
So I think it's more than implied.
Mr. Pyne, just a quick follow-up before I go back to Senator Roberts. Do you consider the Code of Conduct to be voluntary?
Well, I listened to Julie Bishop's evidence, and I think that what Julie Bishop was trying to say was that the Code of Conduct is not legally enforceable. In terms of whether it's voluntary or not, I regard the act of being a Cabinet Minister, reporting to a Prime Minister and then a former Cabinet Minister, as more than voluntary, because I've signed what I regard as a contract with the Prime Minister at the time to abide by the Code, and the Code continues, as you know, from your own studies, for at least 18 months after the time when you stop being a Cabinet Minister, in terms of the first limb, and in terms of the second limb, of course, it continues for the rest of your life.
Thanks, Mr. Pyne. Senator Roberts has one more question, and then I will go to Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chair. The words rigorous processes were mentioned either in Dr. Parkinson's submission or yours, but I want to go to something else that Dr. Parkinson said in association with that. And Dr. Parkinson said, I consider that he, being Mr. Pyne, has put in place mechanisms to ensure that whilst his engagement with EY will appropriately draw on his 26-year experience as a parliamentarian, he will not impart direct or specific knowledge known to him only by virtue of his ministerial position. So my question is, first of all, how did Dr. Parkinson ask about that, and what convinced him that you have specific mechanisms, and what are those mechanisms?
Well, thank you, Senator Roberts. As I said to Senator Patrick, the EY has a global code of conduct, which I've studied closely, but importantly, in any discussions I've ever had with EY, I would have made it very clear that there are two limbs to the Ministerial Code of Conduct, that you can't lobby or advocate for or have business meetings with either the ministers, their staff, or the uniformed or non-uniformed branches of the Department of Defence for 18 months after you leave office, and secondly, that I wouldn't be able to use any information that had come to me as a minister that wasn't otherwise publicly available, and that formed the basis of the contract with EY, and I imparted that to Dr. Parkinson when he asked me about it.
So, in fact, then, they're just broad statements of principle rather than specific mechanisms?
Well, the EY Global Code of Conduct is a published and written document, so it's obviously it's more than just a conversation.
Okay, thank you,
and
Chair.
Every employee or contractor has to abide by the EY Global Code of Conduct.
We might ask EY a little more about that and how it relates to the other specific obligations. Senator Waters.